Exactly.
Against the wall?
There we go. Good evening, it is now 6:30, and I will call the October 23rd Planning Commission meeting to order. Commissioners, thank you for joining us. Staff, thank you for coming tonight. Our first item on the agenda tonight is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from commissioners or staff for the agenda this evening? No changes?
No
No
changes.
changes, I would stand for a motion.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion passes. Our second item on the agenda tonight is the approval of the minutes from the October 9th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those, and are there any changes from those minutes? No changes from the commission, any changes from staff?
No
No
changes.
changes, I would stand for a motion. Patrick,
Move to approve.
move to
Second.
second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Didn't hear a couple people.
I'll abstain because I was not at that meeting.
Okay, we had a couple abstentions. And the motion passes.
Should have done that before the vote.
That's all right. Our third item on the agenda this evening is a public hearing for an application of Junction 35 and 13 LLC for a planned unit development amendment to install 4 30-foot tall storage tanks and allow wall signs exceeding ordinance standards at 12600 West Frontage Road. And presenting this evening is Ms. Garros at the podium.
Thank you, Commissioners. We do have the applicant, Howard, is here this evening for the project. He is one of the, representing one of the two businesses, TC Rubber Inc. And the application this evening is for a PUD amendment. And there are 2 items that are really under consideration. One would be for outdoor storage, and that would consist of the 4 tanks that we'll be taking a look at. And the other is to allow existing wall signs to exceed the ordinance maximum size standard. In terms of the location of the subject site, it's located right at the intersection of the I-35 and Highway 13 interchange, which would be located on the southwest corner of that interchange. And the property is zoned B3 planned unit development. The pictometry shows the site identified, and then adjacent to it to the west is Northern Lights, which is also a commercial development. The former Perkins site is located to the south. There's also another office building located here, and this would be the apartment buildings zoned R3B. The subject site, this is a little bit closer in aerial, and although we don't have the lot lines on here, the application will be for the outdoor storage, for the storage tanks, to be located in this vicinity, and it is all wooded. The majority of the trees are on the applicant's subject site. It's also heavily wooded along the south side, and in addition to that, we'll show in a moment the topography, but there is quite a bit of drop in topography from the south property line, if you will, all the way down to the frontage road. To the right, this is the site plan identifying the location for the 4 towers, or tanks, located on the west side of the building. And they identified the existing trees, which are mature trees, located on the subject site. This is an aerial view of the site provided by the applicant, and the contours are shown on the site. And we've got basically, just to give you an example, there's about a 20-foot drop from this area of the site down to when you're traveling on North Frontage Road. So there's quite a bit of an elevation difference. Same thing here in between where the apartment buildings are and this office building. There's also another quite large elevation drop. So what occurred is at some point when this building was constructed in the early 70s, they graded out part of the hill for the flat subject site and had the first building constructed here, which was a commercial building, but it was a warehouse, service center, and showroom for furniture. excuse me, not furniture, but retail appliances. The tanks that are proposed, there are 4 of them. They will be taller than the existing building. This is looking at the property, this would be the west side of the building here. The tanks are about 30 feet tall. The building at this location is 24 feet tall, so you've got about a 6-foot elevation difference. This would be a picture of what the tanks look like. Primarily the 2 white tanks are what we were talking about. And we had the applicant provide the views, what you would see, and these are perspective drawings that are required anytime we have something that needs a screening standard from the ordinance. And where we take those measurements, or those views, if you will, would be go to about midpoint of the building, and then across the street, a person about 6 feet tall, what is their view of whatever there is to be screened. So when you do that, from the north side, which is the top one, that would be from you have the frontage road that you're at, and then about 20 feet of elevation to the building and beyond. There is, we're looking at the wrong side, I'm sorry. The top one is from the east. And there is a parapet wall on the east elevation, and that's where the old Best Buy sign used to be located. That's about 31 feet tall. So the view of the tanks would be approximately here, but that is obstructed by that existing parapet. This would be basically when you're at the frontage road looking back, I believe. And again, looking up the hill, you also have some screening. They took a picture. This is actually an older picture because this signage construction has been removed from the building. But as you can see, these are folks, the frontage road is here. I believe these cars are on an exit. Then you've got the highway here. So the tanks would be back in this location here, just about 6 feet taller than the building. Again, this is an elevation drawing representation. If you're looking, this would be looking at the north side of the building. And for the subject site itself, they received PUD approval in 2014, and this is the site plan that was approved. And what they had proposed and received approval for was a 2-story addition on the top of the building. So ultimately, they did get approval for a height deviation to be at 50 feet, I believe, as opposed to a 35-foot standard, and that would allow for 2 stories of office. And then in addition to that, this area this is showing what it would look like. It doesn't cover the entire top of the building, just the northern, about third of the building would have this 2-story. And then on the east side of the building, there was going to be an addition as well, a new entry, and then staircase and elevator for the building. The other part of the application relates to signage, and they do have 2 existing wall signs on the building, one for Caliber and one for Elastec. The signs do conform to the ordinance in terms of the overall amount of signage that you can have, up to 16% of the front facades of the building. However, there is also a provision that the maximum size of any one wall sign cannot exceed 300 square feet, and both signs are larger than 300 square feet. This is a PUD application, and we had talked to the applicant about including the deviation for signage with this application as well. The signs were approved in error from staff, and they conformed overall to the signage total area you can have for the site, but larger than the 300 square feet. The benefits of the PUD, the proposal would enhance the ability of the existing businesses to expand their operations. They have been quite successful at this location. As I said, they moved in 2014, have been very successful, and now are looking to obtain this PUD amendment to allow these storage tanks, again, to help them in the processing and molding of plastics for the businesses. The other benefit would be the exterior storage is something that is allowed in the B3 general business, the underlying district, but it does require CUP, or in this case, planned unit development, to do that. The deviations that are requested in order for this application to proceed would be, number one, to allow accessory structures, those being the tanks, to be taller than the building. And this is the 30 feet versus the existing 24-foot tall building. Again, at the time that the additions would be constructed on the north side, those are upwards of 50 feet for those additions. So those would provide enhanced screening above and beyond what's being shown as part of this application. The second deviation is there is a standard for warehouse, wholesale showrooms, and multi-tenant warehouse facilities. And one of those performance standards is basically they want the exterior building materials to be compatible with the adjacent uses, and then also the overall appearance of the building is intended to be commercial or an office rather than a warehouse type facility. So the second deviation would be from that provision. And the third deviation is for the wall signs, again, to allow each of those signs to exceed the maximum 300 square foot wall sign standard of the ordinance. In terms of the application itself, I want to go back to the site plan. What they're proposing to do is to add about a 600 square foot cement patio or pad in this location. There would be a 4-foot sidewalk that would surround that, so altogether about 600 square feet. They do need to have that cement pad in order to provide structural support for these towers. The towers, there will be towers there. However, there will not be any additional processing type equipment. Rather, the pellets will be stored within these, and then they will be conveyed directly into the interior of the building and used inside for their molding and plastics purposes. Outside the tanks, there is proposed, you can see it here, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's proposed to be a chain link fence for security purposes around the tanks in that location. The city engineer did take a look at the site, and with the existing contours and elevation out there, the adjacent property, which is the lighting, Southern Lights business, they have some existing drainage issues on their site. So the city engineer, in taking a look at this, in this location, the topography is relatively flat around the building for when they graded to initially construct the building. But there may need to be some curbing installed at the around the pad, and then also particular attention paid to not diverting any additional storm water to the adjacent property because they do not want to exacerbate any conditions. Those standards that will need to be reviewed in terms of the grading plan and erosion control plan will be done at the time of building permit, but we have included that as a condition just because there is some particular awareness of issues on the adjacent property. With that, the recommendation from staff is we're recommending approval of the PUD amendment, subject to 4 conditions. Number 1 is the standard condition that all the previous conditional use and PUD conditions will remain in full force and effect. Number 2, the tanks are white, as indicated. They will be behind wooded areas, and we don't think that they will be visible at all in times when there's leaf-on conditions. When there's leaf-off conditions, then we think that you will probably be able to see them, but you're going to have to be looking at that corner of the building per se to see it. And we are suggesting that the tanks be painted a dark brown color, similar to the existing roof, so that they appear, you don't see them, they don't stand out with the rest of the woods. And then we also are recommending, because this is a commercial site, but an industrial application, that the tanks be removed at such time as the businesses cease operating. And then number 4 is related to the engineering department reviews, that their grading and erosion control plans would need to be approved by the city engineer prior to any construction at the site. And with that, this is a public hearing, and I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Deb. I'm going to ask you a couple questions regarding the item you presented that shows that the building, the second story of the building, that made it appear more of an office. That has not been completed to date, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And
That was
I'll-
part of the 2014 PUD approval. That included the addition, to the north part of the building of these office stories. Also, the entrance plan on the east side of the building. They received approval at that point because the building had been vacant for a couple of years. So they did receive approval to allow for manufacturing and industrial processing within the building. So that is included as well.
And that approval was contingent on the building being cohesive with the other surrounding buildings that appear office, even though it was warehouse.
I think from a
also.
staff perspective, that was an important, and that was considered to be a positive aspect of the operation, that you really would not have outward appearances that it was anything other than a commercial building.
And then were there any requirements as far as when that needed to be completed?
No, there was not a specific phasing plan approved for the additions. So there, as a PUD, they could come in at any point in time, and as long as the additions were similar to what was approved, those would allow it to be constructed. They wouldn't have to come back through the process.
So if they were going to do this, they don't need to come back before,
That's
because it's already been
correct.
approved in the 2014 PUD.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I'll follow up with the applicant on some more of that. And my second question was, as far as the tanks being painted, do we have an ordinance for maintenance for tanks?
Yes, we do. Now that we've adopted the International Property Maintenance Code, that covers pretty much painting, exteriors, all sorts of things. So, yeah, if you have peeling paint and whatnot as part of code enforcement, they can address that issue.
And it does apply, I mean, it doesn't call it tanks by name? Or
No.
No?
No, it's all exterior.
Just any type?
Materials,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions for staff while we have Ms. Garros at the podium?
Sure.
Commissioner Benke?
To the tanks, no, let me back up. Can we look at that drawing that showed the screening from the parapets? I'm pretty sure that this top one, the north one, shows it with the two-story,
with the-
the addition
with
done
the-
on the left side, right side of the building there, which doesn't really do anything, because even if you brought that down to the current level of the roof, you're still gonna screen not only the HVACs, but the tanks from the freeway. But
Yes.
I did see that.
Thank you for addressing, yes,
Yeah.
that is correct.
Okay, then I'm assuming that with the PUD, that Southern Lights and the other lessees in that building were all notified, and was there any comment back from them
Yes.
about this?
We did notify property owners within 350 feet, was also published, received no comments from anyone for this application.
Okay, and then curious, given the fact that those tanks likely need to be refilled, was there any discussion with the applicant, and we can obviously ask him too, why the tanks needed to be in that particular location? It seems like it's about the hardest place to try to refill them.
Yep, we would suggest that that
Yep,
be
okay.
addressed by the applicant, yes.
Okay, you talked about the drainage, and presumably what the city engineer has talked about to date would not involve the removal of any trees, since trees are being presented as a screening factor here?
That's correct.
Okay.
They do have enough flat area the trees are far enough back that there should not be removal of trees for this application.
Okay, and then I know that you brought up tank color, and my aspect on it is, does the applicant agree with it mainly because I'm wondering if there's any issue that the applicant might have to have a dark-colored tank with solar heating, and the fact that he is storing rubber and other products, is there an issue for them that this would create a hardship for?
That I would address
Right,
for the
okay, that
applicant as
hadn't
well.
been talked, okay,
No, not specifically, no.
okay.
Any other questions, Commissioner Benke?
No, that's.
Commissioner Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Garros, I think you answered, but I didn't get the full answer from you. Because of the topography of that area, I think you said the engineer would be looking at the grading.
Yes,
Is that right?
yes,
Would that include drainage from this area because of the topography?
yes.
Okay.
Yep, exactly. What they had suggested is most likely, let me see if I can get a better, over in this location, you can see they're looking to basically come to this area here for the pad and the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And what they were saying is, it's very close, in fact, this encroaches a little bit into the drainage and utility easement, but the city engineer doesn't have an issue for the sidewalk encroaching within that. But basically, they're thinking that this may need to include a curb so that you don't get any of this water draining over anywhere onto the adjacent property. So there is another, I believe, storm sewer pipe. I don't know the exact location of it, but that they think that the water can be routed to in order to accomplish that.
That would be very helpful for the neighboring business because they are having their own issues with
Yes.
water right now.
Yes. We don't want to
This
do
might be a
anything.
minor issue. You said that because it's a business, those tanks must be removed if the business is close up,
Yes,
cease doing business.
yes.
What if one of them decide to close up?
What we're talking about is really the use of those. So if they leave the business that is using that in the processing, we're talking about removing them at that point in time.
I know Commissioner Benke raised the issue of the color. I always like white tanks. I don't know why I like white tanks, but I would like to hear indeed if they, because of what they will store in those tanks, if the dark brown would, as Commissioner Benke asked, whether that would create some problems for them. So I hope to hear from the applicant.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh. Any other questions,
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Benke?
Deb, I just realized something here. This picture does not show a dark brown roof. This picture shows what appears to possibly be a gravel roof. And that's not. And I guess what I'm curious about would be the language of the approval that ties the tank color to the roof color without, because it
We were
roof,
following their graphics.
yeah, and this looks like it's been modified, but I guess my point would be is roofs can be changed, and if the roof goes to a white one, which a lot of buildings are going to these days for energy efficiency, does that create a problem with the language? Is there another element on the building that we can refer to that is not likely to be changed?
We could just indicate that it would be, the color, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bradrick?
Ms. Garros, I had that as a note. I assumed it was a typo. Instead of roof color, should it have been wall color?
No, what we're looking at
Were you
is.
trying to tie it to
is
the
their
roof?
graphics, yeah, trying to have a deep color. In working with cell towers for 6 years that I did those, usually if it's wooded area, they're less visible if they're the darker color as opposed to the lighter color. So that's really where that suggestion is. We're totally open to the planning commission and whatever your thoughts or recommendations are.
I have personally been responsible for maintaining tanks like that, and it's a long-term thing from rust and stuff. And so I'd allow the applicant to paint whatever they could to try to hide that. Obviously, I think we're gonna get into it. I was questioning why they were there. That's obviously from a location standpoint, the most difficult place to get them craned into. And so they obviously are there for a manufacturing reason. You can't see them much from the road, so I would, I guess my question would be, what could be the best color that's gonna be easily maintained so it doesn't, and plus, if there's a problem with the solution, it's probably insulated. But anyway, so, and then, Ms. Garros, Commissioner Benke may have touched on it, but the delivery of product, so it's not, obviously, it's gonna be somehow conveyed from a delivery location to the tanks, and that doesn't require any changes on the outside of the building. Is there hoppers the product's gonna be dumped into and then conveyed to the tanks?
I would address that to the
Okay.
applicant.
That's all I have.
Any other questions, Commissioner Walter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Garros, 2 questions. I'm assuming since these are plastic pellets that would be stored here, it's a solid, and there would be no hazardous material issues?
That's correct. It has been reviewed by our fire department, and this is also in the drinking water protection overlay.
Yeah.
So it's been reviewed by our city engineer as well, and no, these would
So
not-
that's where that normally would show up if we have it
Yes.
be under the building code, fire, or
Yes.
police. Okay. Second thing, I think I understand the signage deviation issue, but just so I'm correct. So the applicant sought a permit for their current signage that was approved
Yes,
so they got all approvals prior to that. It was more of an error on the city's side.
that's exactly correct,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, that's all for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Walter. Any other questions for staff before I bring the applicant up? No questions for staff. If I could have the applicant come to the podium so we can ask you a couple questions. Short straw.
Welcome back.
Welcome.
Okay.
If you could give us your name and address for the record, I would be.
Ernest DeLang, and then my business address is 12600 West Frontage Road, Burnsville.
Thank you. We've got kind of a list of questions here, and I'm wondering if I can just kind of go through them with you, just to kind of keep some order here.
Sounds good.
First question, as far as filling the tanks with the product, could you explain the process there a little bit for us?
You'd fill it with, we'd put like probably a stainless steel pipe across the top of the roof of the building, so you'd fill it from the front side. So they'd just come up with, and then they'd just vacuum it you'd suck it into the tanks.
Interesting. Okay.
Is that part of the plan that we've seen tonight, the stainless steel pipe?
No,
No.
we have not seen that, but it would not be an issue. Be considered, it would be anything like mechanical equipment, those
Would
types of
that
things.
require screening?
Yes, but it would be, most likely, it would be screened because of where the roof, I mean, if these are 6 feet taller, something that
It would
a
just be-
pipe is gonna be a lot.
It'd be real low, almost right on the rooftop.
Yep.
And then up and into the tank.
Yeah, and then when it gets to the
Excuse me,
tank, we'd go up and.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm having trouble imagining that, but the colors of the tank, do you see any hardship with the recommendation to get them colored to a different color, or to Commissioner Benke's point about melting or product?
You know what, I don't know if there's an issue. There probably isn't, I'm not sure, but if I'm guessing, I guess that wouldn't be a problem, but most of them you do see are white, so. And eventually our roof will probably turn white, because that roof is getting to be towards the end of its life. So, if we paint it brown, then 2 years later we go with a white roof, and you're,
Yeah. Just
See,
imagine.
Mr. Chair, I told you I like white.
It's the purest of all colors. I had asked Ms. Garros a question about the building expansion and the additional square footage for the office.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can kind of give us?
an update?
Yeah.
Yeah, to redo the footings and to make that north end of the building kind of buildable, it was gonna cost more than I was kind of wanting to spend, and so my newest idea is to, on the south side where it used to be building, I don't know if you guys know, but that building used to go further to the south. Was looking at adding an addition on there and putting warehouse below and then offices above that. So when I built the warehouse, I could just build the office, or build the structure so it would handle the warehouse or the offices on top. So that's the latest plan.
Okay.
So we're probably a couple years out from that, but we may start talking. I've actually talked to Deb and some of the planners, and the biggest hurdle was the fire code, or so I had the fire marshal out and we looked at it and he was okay. I understand what I need to do. I need to leave a walkway around there so we can get hoses, and he kind of measured the distance, and so he was good with it, so.
Okay. All right. And then you've already addressed the roof change from color type and things like that. Is there any questions from the commission outside of the things that we just touched on? That we have them up? No questions? All right. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
With that, I will open the public hearing for this item. And if anybody would like to come to the podium and speak to this tonight, please give us your name and address for the record. And seeing nobody, I will close the public hearing. And I will turn it over to the commission for any type of discussion, questions, or motion on this item. Commissioners, what are we thinking?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner
in
Singh?
view of what the gentleman just said, that in a couple of years the roof will be white, do you think we still need to require them to do a brown color on the tanks?
I see no issue with white. And if the change is looming, and then you're gonna have to change it back to white, I could see us wanting to prevent a future hardship from having to paint it one color and then paint it back another color because the PUD is indicating it has to match the roof. So I'm okay with that. I don't know where the rest of the commission stands. Commissioner Patrick?
I would be in favor of removing number 2 for a couple reasons. We did, now I know the building's white, but the seasoning place on South Cross, we did.
Quality ingredients.
Quality ingredients, we did a pretty sizable addition in tanks, and they were white. And going back to my personal experience, the toughest thing about these tanks is gonna be maintaining the ladders rusting or the fittings rusting, and that looks, and so if we can make it as easy as possible for the applicant to maintain it, in my opinion, that's just white. If something rusts, they can spray that piece versus trying to maintain a lot of other pieces. So I would be in favor of removing number 2.
Thank you. Commissioner Menke?
Sure. You know, in deference to staff, I understand what they're after here. I do think that number 2 is written in a way to not tie the tank to the roof color. However, given where it is, buried in the trees, in what is arguably an industrial setting, I personally don't have any real issue with the tanks being up in the back of the building. You know, I think it would be more convenient for them, and they would be better screened if they were on the south side of the building, more in the parking lot. But
now we
that's not where they're,
Now we know they may build something there.
yeah, right. So that's right. So, yeah, and I guess, I'm a little, I think a little bit of our language in here right now is coached towards the addition, the currently approved addition being built, and that's not going to be. So, or may not be. So I'm wondering if we should just be a little careful about how that is put into the record going forward. Just, I mean, and mainly it's just the screening thing, and it really doesn't matter, but it's just instead of having it rely on that, I think if we just rely on the fact that the building height will screen it, cool. But anyway, I just think that the tanks are probably fine as is too. They're an industrial product, and I don't see any reason to change them.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I would stand for a motion possibly to amend the one on the floor. We have.
Just a clarification, Mr. Chair. What have we agreed on number 2?
I believe that's what we're agreeing on, is to remove item number 2.
Okay.
Unless the applicant's adamant about it staying. Are you okay with that?
With not having painted?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, great, perfect.
okay. Well, with that, then I guess Commissioner Walter?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council approval of the PUD amendment to allow for 30-foot tall storage tanks to be installed on the west side of the building and allow existing wall signs on the north side of the building to be larger than the maximum 300 square foot ordinance standard, subject to the following conditions, 1, 3, and 4.
Second, Mr. Chair.
A motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And the motion is approved. In that, we'll go, Deb, will that go before the city council now that because we deviated from the approval?
It will go to the city council, but it's unanimous, so it will be on their consent agenda. The meeting is on November 6th, which is a Monday because of the elections, and it also starts at 5:30. It will be placed on the consent agenda, and we'll send a copy of the report to you.
Did you come to that or no?
It's up to you if you want to come or not.
Consent is usually one motion for a vote, one vote for multiple items. So unless a city councilman decides to pull it for discussion, yeah. So, thank you for,
Thank you.
good
We're
luck
glad
and,
things are going well for you.
yeah.
Yeah, they're going well, yeah. Had record back-to-back months, the last 2 months, so it's
Stick around Burnsville for a while. All right.
Yes.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure working with Devin Group. It's been a lot of fun. And quite frankly, we've hired 3 professional people this year. We put on plus more warehouse, we've bought new machines. We're growing out of the spot. That's why we're not going up.
Definitely.
So, looking forward to Deb, we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you
sounds
so
good.
much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Have a great night. All right, our 4th item on the agenda this evening is discussion to possibly move the planning commission meeting start times. I've not introduced an item like this, so I think I'll just throw it to the commission or ask Deb for a little guidance on how we should approach this item.
Certainly. Commissioner Benke brought this up at our last meeting. As you all may be aware, the city council changed their meeting times. They will be starting from now on at 5:30 instead of 6:30. We did indicate, that the item was brought up, and with the other commissions, what the city manager had suggested is for this to be placed on the various different commissions' agenda for discussion. Probably, if the council would want all of the commissions starting at the same time, but they did want us to, put it on for discussion, and if planning commission is, would like to see a different starting time, we would note that and then bring that to council when their consideration, and just know that before it could be enacted, there are a couple of changes that need to occur to city policy and the city code, not the zoning ordinance, but city code. So it's really a discussion item
Okay.
for you.
Who would like to start?
I think I better, right? I brought it up. The reason I brought it up was, obviously, the council took some time and investigated the issue. And my opinion was, if there was a reason that council changed, does that reason apply to the commissions? So really, I thought that as long as it just happened, it's all fresh in everybody's mind. Deb, I don't know if you have available, the rationale that council used. I guess since I stand on the other side of the dais also, I was able to, think about it from that side. And, a lot of the meetings I go to start at 7 p.m. And especially this time of the year, it feels like it's middle of the night already. And then the meetings go on from there. Most of the cities that I present at, they've got their own solution, and I'm just curious if there is rationale from the council side. as to why it might be different here. I think a lot of times when I mention something, everybody sort of maybe thinks that I have an agenda or an end game on it, and I think typically what I'm doing is I'm asking the question to see where we're going with it. I like to make sure that the status quo isn't the only thing that we think about. So, with that said, when I get to those meetings at 7 o'clock, it does feel very late. We're not 7, we're 6:30. A couple of things that I thought of were if the meeting was to move earlier and the end time does not change, it essentially could make for some longer meetings for us, which I don't know if that's a problem or it just makes things worse. The real question, I think, is as we move forward, is an earlier time more conducive to having attendance? Is an earlier time going to be closer to people's end of workday where they're not going to go home first and then not want to come to meetings? Our audiences can be a little thin sometimes, and what can we do to encourage engagement with the community?
Commissioner Bradrick.
Thank you, Chair. From my perspective, the council, made some decisions about people coming and seeing meetings and trying to be business friendly and drive, so they don't obviously have wages of paying someone to be here. Personally, 5:30 is a little more difficult for me than 6:30, but from a consistency standpoint, the Planning Commission is the only commission that by state statute has public hearings. And in many cases, people will come to the Planning Commission and the City Council meeting. And so, with that being said, I believe I would be in favor of us moving to 5:30. From a consistency standpoint, if there's never going to be a question, I showed up at one meeting at 5:30 and one meeting at 6:30, and the meeting had already started, and I like the idea that, I'm not making comments about other commissions. They could certainly do what they would like to see. But for me personally, I like the idea that an applicant's going to be at our meeting at 5:30, and then in most cases, just like the applicant this evening, is going to have to come back to a 5:30 meeting at the City Council. And outwardly, from the applicant standpoint, I think that's a little cleaner process.
Commissioner Rovich.
I actually think moving it earlier would be more difficult for people to attend with their jobs, but also it kind of falls right around that dinner hour. So anyone with children, it would be very difficult, almost impossible to attend. I actually like the 6:30 start time, primarily because I have a small child, so I can get home, I can pick them up from daycare, I can feed dinner and at least see them before they go to bed, where if it were 5:30, I would never make that. Also just with work, that's cutting it pretty close, so I think that would be difficult for potential applicants to make it to meetings.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, this is the difficult one, really, because the City Council has already made a decision to move their meeting up to 5:30. I think, and I hear what Commissioner Bradrick is saying, and that we need to be consistent. If they start at 5:30, we should start at 5:30. However, I've been giving some thought to it since it came up at City Council, and I asked myself, why are we here? And I'm answering my own question. We are here to serve the people of the city. Our customers are the people, our taxpayers of the city. And if we move it up to 5:30, are we doing our customers a favor, or are we helping out our customers? We are the only commission that has public hearings, and our taxpayers come to these meetings because they have issues, they are applicants, and I think it will be very difficult for them, especially those who are working And as the commissioner just said, those who have families, small children, to come from work, go home, take care of the kids, and then come to a 5:30 meeting will be very difficult. All of you know I'm retired, so for me, it's fine. You can bring it to 4 o'clock, and then I can go home and see Monday Night Football. I'm thinking of commissioners who have jobs and probably working in St. Paul. And you know that 5 o'clock traffic to get here, and it will be very difficult for them. And for taxpayers who are working St. Paul but needs to come to a public hearing at 5:30, it will be very difficult for them. And I think in the interest of our taxpayers, I would prefer that our meeting remain at 6:30. I'm torn because you want consistency with the city council. But then I'm saying here, we need to be sensitive to our taxpayers and our commissioners who have jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh. Commissioner Walter, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm really torn on this. I see the arguments on both sides. I don't necessarily think there's any big loss of democracy by moving this moving it 1 hour. We have a lot of ways that people can engage in this process. And as we see, they're jumping to do it at the 6:30 start time. But I do think as I paid attention to the city council debate on this, it did seem like a lot of the focus was on making ensuring the city is friendly to those that have the business before city entities too. So, and I do think that we just had a little awkward moment here where we were telling the applicant they had to come back at a different time for the city council meeting. So I would buy the consistency perspective, and I would support moving it.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner
can I
Banky?
follow up on a couple points? When I suggested it, I wasn't necessarily thinking of an hour, although I do appreciate the whole idea of matching council time. I don't see any reason why 6 or 6:30 or 5:30 really have that much difference. I'm very sensitive to Commissioner Mahovitz. Close enough?
Marovich.
No, I'm sorry.
Marovich.
Marovich. Oh, yeah, that's right, okay.
I practiced that.
Marovich's comments, because that actually was my point, is how are we going to encourage engagement with the community? And I think that's what Commissioner Singh was after too. I have been to city councils and commissions where hearings were held at both locations, at both events. I've been at city meetings where planning commission meets at one time, council meets at a different time. That isn't necessarily a negative or a problem for most people. You're mailed your agenda, it's right on the top. A lot of times they'll highlight it. It's knowing what the city does. We do it on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. For us, it's really no change. I think that the real focus to me comes back to a little bit what Commissioner Singh said. What is going to, address our customer the best? And I didn't know, and that's what I want to find out, so.
And I'm kind of with you on that. I didn't really have a preference kind of walking into this discussion one way or the other. And, I can empathize with Commissioner Marovich. I've got a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old at home, so that little extra hour is helpful. But I've kind of broke this into 2 categories in my head, and that was our citizens and then our applicants, who oftentimes aren't necessarily our citizens, but building owners or developers or other business entities, and would bringing it closer to 5:30 or their typical workday make it more convenient for them and make it more business friendly. But then are we doing our citizens a disservice by putting it right at dinner time? And so I'm kind of torn. You've all presented very good points this evening. I guess my question for Deb would be, have you experienced any outcry in one direction or the other from applicants in your tenure?
Really not. I think, just want to make clear for the commission, I think it's important, for the city council that all of the commissions have their start time consistent, not necessarily that it be consistent with the city council start time. Some of the discussions that they had were that with the city council, they usually are not holding public hearings. That's held, for the most part at planning commission meetings. And, people can come in and then their business, at least with this council, it is really short, in terms of the council meetings. They did talk about also just staff time, the amount of hours, in between, and that could save some costs that way. But I don't think that they had any, anything particular that they were thinking for the commissions, other than you guys hold the public hearings, so in that respect,
So there was no, the city council, before they made a decision to bring it forward to 5:30, did they hold a public hearing?
no.
Thank you.
And you're right, we have had commissioners in the past that had to travel, had jobs in St. Paul or Minneapolis for commissioners and applicants. I know just from, I always had to, I lived in Prior Lake, and I had to travel all over, the metro and points beyond for meetings. So anytime, 6:30 in my book was great, because that was earlier. But really, from a staff standpoint, I don't think it matters to us.
Chair?
Commissioner Benke?
Yeah, if I'm going to a meeting as an applicant, I plan it in my workday. So, the aspect of driving is immaterial. I'm planning for that as I'm going to the meeting. If the meeting was at 5 or 4 or 7, I would plan for that. I don't think that's necessarily 100% of what I'm thinking about here. And I think that, well, I've said it twice, basically, what is going to be best to encourage our
Engagement.
our cities, our citizens.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Singh?
do we have to come to a decision on this tonight?
No.
Okay. I think what I suggest you do, that take the feelings of commissioners, and we can see if it's unanimous that we stay at 6:30, or it's unanimous that we go at 5:30, or whatever the breakdown is. So if you want, we can bring it back at some other time.
Do you feel like we need it to be unanimous?
No, not that. I would go with what the majority of people, I'm not, as I said, I am retired. I can
Yeah.
come to meeting at 4:00. And I'm thinking about you guys who work and who have young families. And I'm thinking of the taxpayers of our city who are also working and need to travel to get here for a 5:30 public hearing. I'm not stuck in any one, but I will go with the majority.
Commissioner Benke?
Yeah, I guess I was sort of thinking the same thing, and I just realized one other aspect too, in terms of engagement, we have there'll be turnover on this board, and, again, you need people to come in and serve, and not everybody, we can't always rely on retired Burnsville residents to fill this, and I guess there's only one right now, but anyway, I'm close, I'm very close. I tell you, anyway, would we want to take the temperature of the other councils
Yeah.
too, the other commissions? Deb, I would imagine if the council would like them all to be similar, and they should, I agree, I think that makes more sense than everybody matching the city council, then I think at a certain point, the feedback from the other commissions could be helpful.
That's fair.
And too, that is just from a staff standpoint, we believe that the council has said that in the past, when they were setting, meeting times and things, when we went from 7 to 6:30.
Yeah.
With this particular council, that question hasn't come up at
Okay.
all, so.
Okay,
Just want to make that clear.
I think that's a fair assessment, just to gauge the other, I mean, granted, the planning commission does more heavy lift, I'm not gonna say more, but there's,
Yep.
I'm not gonna say what I was about to say.
Okay.
But, you know, I would like to see what the PNRC and the economic, and Commissioner Frederick has had his finger up, and I apologize.
I was just trying to
No,
help you
I-
with your conversation. Two
The floor
things.
is yours.
One, I wanted to make it well known that the 5:30 was not the best for me personally.
Yep.
So I was looking at, and I had sat back and thought about it. Commissioner Singh and Commissioner Benke's points, I would say that the lion's share of the people that sit in front of us are the businesses. The sheer number of people that do come and land in this room and talk to us are the applicants and the people that are being paid and that are putting in front of us. And then I guess I would say the meetings that we have had that are somewhat controversial, and I could give you a half a dozen. I don't think it makes any difference what time the meeting is. They're going to be there. My suggestion would be, as we move forward to what we've been talking about, I think it would be advantageous that if we do it, once there's some consensus with other commissions, that typically the commission's turn in July, isn't it July, Deb?
Yes.
You know, that's when someone's tenure is over and a new person starts. If we were going to do that, I think it'd be important that we maybe consider changing it at that time. So any new people that are going to be on the commission would know that in advance.
I think that'd be fair,
I agree.
because somebody might not have applied had it been at an earlier time.
That's all, Chair.
I guess, I don't know if we can table a discussion, but I like that recommendation of getting consensus from the other commissions that do a great job and a lot of work. And we kind of see where they're at, and then maybe bring this back
Sure.
and
It's
just
up to
kind of
you.
see what they're, is that okay with everybody else? Okay. Good. Excellent. Democracy.
At its finest.
Our next item on the agenda is updates, and Ms. Garros, our next planning commission meeting, and if there's any comp plan updates.
Yes, there are. We did have the last advisory committee meeting last week, so they are done now with the hard lifting. All of the draft chapters are on the website for those of you that are interested in looking at it in depth, which I'm sure some will. Just kidding. And what we anticipate happening is, at your next meeting, we have got the comprehensive plan on, and that is, we initially were going to have the public hearing, and we actually published it that way and, sent out notices that it would be a public hearing. But we thought it better, after conferring with our consultant, Hoisington Kogler, to do the review with the planning commission, and then request, your consideration. Do you believe that the plan is at a point where it's ready to be sent out for other jurisdictions to review? That would start this 6-month process, and then once we get their comments back, we would be able to come forward with the public hearing and identify, what the comments were, how they've been incorporated, or if there have been issues. I have always done a public hearing before sending it out to folks in all of the cities that I've worked with, but there's not, it can be done at any point in time, so it will really be more of a presentation to you and just direction that we'll be seeking for the comp plan, to send it out for additional reviews to find out what other folks think and what they have in their plans.
Great. Are there any other updates from the commission? If not, I would stand for a motion for
So
adjournment.
move, Mr. Chair.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and the motion is approved. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a great rest of your Monday evening.